Hi, my name's Jewell Hampton, and I'm the lead designer with the LSU Office of Communications and University Relations. I'm here with my colleagues today, Maggie. Hi, Maggie.
Hey.
Tyranesia. Hi, Tyranesia.
Hey, y'all.
And Marcus. Hi, Marcus.
Hey, guys.
And we are going to walk you through the important principles of accessible PDF creation and how to design for accessibility when working in Adobe InDesign. Now, it's important to note that there are other software that you can use to create an accessible PDF. Most notably, Microsoft Office, including Word or PowerPoint, are a couple of the more common tools that we see people on our campus use. And the principles that we're going to talk about today apply regardless of which software you use to make your PDF. But Adobe InDesign is going to give you the most control over your document and allow you to do your accessibility on the front end while you're working. If you're creating something that is really design rich or has a lot of graphic elements in it, you want to ensure that all of the principles that we're going to walk through are considered and applied, and if possible, done so in your native document. When working with Microsoft Office, you have to remember it's not a design software. While you can add images and graphics to a Word document and save it as a PDF, it's not set up to easily handle a complex design or something that has a lot of graphics in it. And as a result, it's not going to allow you to do all of your accessibility principles in that native file. You'll have to do it once you're done in Adobe Acrobat. Working in that native file is really important. It's going to save you a lot of time and on the back end and allow you to, well, let me put it this way. When you think about how you work and collaborate on a team, and you get to the end of your project, somebody is going to have a suggestion or something to help improve your document. If you have already done all of your accessibility check on that document, then go back and make an edit in your native file. When you save your PDF, you're going to have to do all of that accessibility work again if you're working in a software program like Microsoft Office. If you're working in Adobe InDesign, you have the ability to build in all of your accessibility principles, and then it's just a matter of making edits and saving the PDF, and your document's going to pass an accessibility check when you're done. Keeping your designs in Microsoft Word, if that's where you're comfortable and that's where you're going to work, keeping your designs simple is what's going to help you make sure that you are working, that you're not creating a lot of work for yourself on the back end. And as designers, we typically are working in Adobe InDesign and the Adobe Creative Suite. So that's why we're choosing to show that to you today. But again, these principles are going to apply regardless of what software you're using. I'm going to go ahead and advance my slides here. And I just want to, before we get into the details, I want to talk to you a little bit about audience. As designers, we are always asking at the beginning of a project, who is the audience? Who is it that we are talking to? And when you're creating digital content, it's important not just to think about who, but to also think about how that audience that has been specified is consuming the content that you're creating. I know for me, understanding how each step I'm taking towards accessibility is going to help someone on the back end be better able to receive this content helps me to remember to take each step. So for example, if you think about auditory accessibility, you might not think a PDF is something that you would have to consider that for, but if you think about linking to a video in your PDF document, you need to make sure that video is closed captioned. If you think about offering contact information, you're going to want to make sure that that contact information includes more than just a telephone number. If you think about visual accessibility, this one's a little more obvious. You want to make sure that your colors are appropriate and have enough contrast, not just for somebody with low vision that might be looking at your document, but also color blindness, making sure that you have selected colors that are going to be visible to most people. As somebody that's using a screen reader, you want to make sure that all of your copy is accessible and ordered properly so that screen readers can access the content. For physical accessibility, you also want to keep in mind the fact that not everybody uses a mouse. Some people might be tabbing or using some other assistive device to navigate your document, so that the flow order has to be right. And then also, if you think about cognitive accessibility, you need clear and consistent semantic headings so that it's easy for everybody to understand. Thinking about white space and how you're using capitalization with upper and lowercase letters, which are going to be more legible than all caps all the time. There's all of this information is available to you in a variety of resources. The World Wide Web Consortium, known as the W3C, is a really great resource. And we're going to provide a document to you at the end that has some links that you can do a deeper dive and dig into accessibility a little more to help train yourself or your team. But ultimately, you're going to need to do some more training. So we also have some links for additional training available to you. Accessibility in your PDF is the only way to ensure that you're going to reach the entire audience that you're intending to reach. So let's get started. We're going to take turns going through the principles of accessibility and finish by giving a brief overview of how to check your work using Adobe Acrobat. Maggie is up next, and she'll get started with the basics of setting up that document with the metadata. So I'm going to hand it over to Maggie.
Thanks, Jewel. All right, so first we're going to talk about what the basic information is that you need in order to make this PDF accessible. So at a minimum, a PDF requires a document title and a brief description of its contents. And when this information is saved, it's automatically transferred to Acrobat as required metadata. Excuse me. All right, next slide, Jewel. So when you're in InDesign, you'll go up to File, File Info, and then on the box to your right, you'll see all the fields for you to fill in. So like I said, at minimum, you need a document title and a description, but the more information you give, the easier it will be for this to be searched and for web optimization. All right, and let's see, let's go to the next one. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to set up a preset for your PDF accessibility. When you export your PDF, there's going to be different options to choose, and all of this will become the tagging structure, order, and navigation scheme of the resulting PDF document. So on the next slide, we go through the steps. So also, again, we're in InDesign. So File, Export, and then you have all of these different options. You'll do Adobe PDF Print, and then you'll choose smallest file size. In the viewing area, you'll do View Fit Page, Layout Single Page, and you want to make sure the box to view PDF after exporting is checked. It's just an easier way for you to immediately check your PDF because it opens right up for you. In Options, you want to click Optimize for Fast Web View, Create Tagged PDF, and then you want to include your bookmarks and hyperlinks, and that's all the information that you've done in InDesign, and you want to make sure it's saved. So then on the next slide, we go to compression. So since we originally saved it for the smallest file size, the default is to compress those images, but we don't want that to happen. So you need to go in and manually choose to do not downsample. And then for advanced, you want to choose display document title. So when you go and save that preset, you can name it whatever you'd like. I tend to just do accessible PDF because it's easiest for me to remember and to pick quickly. All right, and that is it for this first section. I'm going to hand it off to Ty to talk about semantic headings and paragraph styles.
All right, y'all. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll start with semantic headings. And if you've ever dabbled in web coding, you probably heard this term before. It's very similar use in designing accessible PDFs. So HTML headings are used to establish a page. They give the page some hierarchy, and then they also allow the reader to easily navigate throughout that page. Next slide, please. So on the right are some examples of the headers that our team uses. And as you can see, there are only 4 that we use. And then on the far right, this is how they're applied. But typically there are 6 HTML headers, and they start from H1 to H6. H1 is typically the most important. You have to make sure that you have at least 1 per page, and you cannot start a document without 1. Yeah, so those are the 4 that we use. You can use all 6. Typically, H1 is the largest and H6 is the smallest. If you are going to avoid using all 6, just make sure that you use them in the proper order. Let's say you want to start with H1, H2, and then you skip H3 because you don't like the style. Just be mindful of the fact that we're designing for all people, not just those who are sighted. So this is going to cause an error on the page if you decide to skip headings that differ from the proper order. So next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to get into paragraph styles. And if you're looking at the right side of the page, you can see how these headers that I originally mentioned show up in a paragraph style panel. So the reason why we're using paragraph styles is because they are core to accessibility. We're going to be talking about this pretty much throughout this presentation. They're going to show up again in table of contents as well as in ordered list. But basically, paragraph styles help to ensure that your PDF or your InDesign document is going to be accessible when you export it for your end user. Next slide, please. All right, so in this panel, it's basically going to show you how to make sure that your stylistic, the way that the styles look visually, connect with how they show up accessibly. So we're going to focus on the HTML and the PDF tags. So if you're working with the H1 style, you're gonna make sure that the tag also says H1 in the HTML and PDF panel. Next slide, please. All right, and then lastly, we're going to talk about caps. So Jewell kind of mentioned it earlier, but you want to make sure to avoid all caps or caps locks, just because when a screen reader is reading all caps letters, it's going to read as individual letters as opposed to a word. So a word like tigers in all caps is going to be read as sort of like an acronym, so TIGERS instead of the word tigers. So there's an easy way to change that style, and you just want to go back into your paragraph style panels and go to case and click all caps. But yeah, you just want to make sure that you're designing for everyone as opposed to just sighted readers. And then we're going to jump into table of contents with Marcus.
Thanks, Ty. So yeah, let's talk about making a table of contents. And on the next slide, we're going to see what's the purpose of designing a table of contents, when to design one, and generating content for your table of contents. So first up, let's talk about the purpose. So on the next slide, we're going to see that the table of contents, it provides a clickable bookmark for navigating documents, even if the table of contents isn't visible in your design of the document. So if you want to hide well, let me backtrack. If it helps people who need to navigate your document a lot easier. So if you don't necessarily have to have a visible table of contents in your document to have the functionality of the bookmarks. So if you want to hide the table of contents, all you would need to do is just move the table of contents on the pasteboard of your InDesign document, and you will still retain the functionality of the bookmark without having the visual of the table of contents. So on the next slide, we're going to see when to design. So you generally want to design a table of contents when your documents are long and have multiple sections. As far as the making one, you generally want to make a table of contents at the beginning part of your design process, as opposed to the tail end of your design process. I've been in a situation where I've had to make a table of contents on the back end of the design process, and it will save you a lot of headache if you plan, and that's something that you just do on the front end of the project as opposed to the end. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about how to generate content for your table of contents. So when you're generating content for your table of contents, you just want to make sure that the main thing you're thinking about is your paragraph styles. As you see in that picture on the right, your table of contents is going to populate itself with the content that's using designated paragraph styles. So with this image, it's only pulling words or copy that is under the paragraph style header 2 or H2 headers. So that's what is going to show up in your table of contents, just all the words that are using that paragraph style. So you want to make sure that you're designating the correct paragraph styles, and you're knowing which ones that you want to populate the table of contents with. So on the next slide, on this panel, you also want to make sure that you are checking the create PDF bookmarks. Create PDF bookmarks to enable the functionality of the bookmarks when you're exporting. So without that, the table of contents doesn't really have any functionality in your PDF. So just make sure you're clicking that button and you should be all good. So I'm going to hand it off to Maggie to talk about different content types.
Thanks, Marcus. All right, so we're going to talk about lists and tables. The first list we're going to talk about is a multi-level list, also known as an outline. So in order to create a multi-level list, you need to define a list and then create a paragraph style for each level of your list. For example, if you have 3 levels in your list, you will have 3 different paragraph styles. You can have up to 9 levels in a multi-level list. Off to the right-hand side, you can see how these levels and sublists could be organized. And then all the way to the right, you'll see a screenshot of the paragraph style. And you'll see how there's a paragraph style for every single level. And then on the next slide, we will talk about defined list. These are nice because you can interrupt these lists with an image, a paragraph of copy, anything, and it will start your listing over again. So for example, when you want, there might be 5 different lists, but you need them to each start with 1, you would use a defined list. So one thing to keep in mind when you are using these, the list, each list and sublist have to use the same defined list, which is also the same case for the multi-level list. And next, we're going to talk about tables. This is fairly simple, but a screen reader cannot read that it's a table unless you tag the header as a header. So you would highlight your table header, go up to table, convert rows to header, and that's it. And then your PDF will be set up as a table. And I believe that is it for lists and tables. So next, I'm going to hand it back to Ty to talk about hyperlinks.
Thank you, Maggie. All right, so excuse me. I'm pretty sure everyone has a general idea of what a hyperlink is. It's a piece of clickable text that navigates you to another page, another PDF, an image. But when you're designing when you're creating a hyperlink in InDesign, everything's going to happen in one panel. So it's probably the easiest thing that you could do as far as making that piece of type accessible. So what you're going to do is go to your navigation bar, go to Window, Interactive, and then Hyperlink, and then boom, it's there. So what you're going to do is highlight whatever piece of type that you want to make a hyperlink, and then in the panel, you're going to click whether or not you want it to be a URL, a file, or an email, and then you're going to make sure that the destination is either that file name, .pdf, or that URL. And think something to keep in mind when you are deciding what type you want to create as a hyperlink. Do not try not to use redundant language like click here. Just make sure that your URL is active, because that's gonna, for someone who's using assistive technology, it's gonna sound repetitive to use click here as opposed to just register for orientation. Next slide, please. And then something else you're gonna look at, if you go from appearance to accessibility within that hyperlink panel, you can you have the ability to add alt text, which basically just gives your reader an option of whether or not they want to even click on that hyperlink. So if you want to, if somebody has already registered for orientation and you want them to click on a link that is going to take them to a campus tour, excuse me, you can either let them know that they're going to be leaving the site, or you can let them know that they're going to be watching a YouTube video. And that'll let them know whether or not they would like to leave the page that they're currently on. And that's it for hyperlinks. All right, going to bring it back to Marcus for read order and tab order.
Thanks, Ty. So we're going to be talking about the purpose of read order, layer order as a way to kind of control read order, and the purpose of tab order, and the articles panel. So on the next slide, let's talk about the purpose of read order. So read order which is better understood as flow order, is the order in which elements of your design will be stripped and reflowed to help those who are needing cognitive assistance. So there's an example on this image on the right. This is what the order will look like in your Acrobat PDF. So you can look at this view through the order panel of the Acrobat screen. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about the purpose of, the layer order as a way to control your read order. So just a little disclaimer, it can be kind of confusing to understand initially. So please have patience with yourself and have patience with me as I try to explain it. So to control your read order, you want to structure your layers in a specific way. So your topmost visual element must be at the bottom of your layer panel, and the bottommost element of your visual element of your document must be at the top of the layer panel. So to give a quick analogy, just to help you understand, like we read from top to bottom. You want to structure your layers in a way that is bottom to top. So hopefully that clears up a little bit or puts you in the right direction, but you just want to make sure that whatever is first up on your document that needs to be read first is bottom on the layers panel. That could be really hard sometimes to figure out when it comes to layer stacking, but just try your best, and it's really just how the elements will be stripped for those who need cognitive assistance. So try the best that you can, but just try to layer it in the best way you can. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about tab order. So the tab order it allows assistive devices to skip through the document content if users aren't using a mouse to navigate. So the tab order failure, they're pretty common when you're exporting print PDFs. And the solution is pretty simple. All you have to do is go into your accessibility checker in the Acrobat, in Adobe Acrobat, and right-click the tab order and then press fix. And boom, it's done. So you don't have to worry about it after you do that, and you should be all good. So up next, we're going to talk about the articles panel. And the articles panel is to help those who with screen readers properly read through your content in the order that you indicate. So the articles panel is an all or nothing tool. So you want to make sure if you're going to use the articles panel, you use it throughout your whole document and not half of your document or spots of your document. So if you use half of use the articles panels for half of your document, it's going to artifact the other half of it. So anything that you don't designate in your articles panel, it will artifact. So just make sure that you're using it for everything. And one thing you want to make sure you click when you're using the articles panel is the use for tagging order in your tag PDF settings. So you just make sure you press the menu panel settings and you press that button, and it will enable the functionality when you export it. So yeah, that's the articles panel, and I'm gonna hand it off to Maggie to talk about alt text for photographs and illustrations.
Thanks, Marcus. All right, so for photos and illustrations, a screen reader can only indicate the presence of an image. It can't tell you what the image is, so that's our job to describe it. So you'll go up to first you'll click on your image, and then you'll go up to object export options, and then you'll click custom, and in this box you'll be able to write your description of the image. You just kind of want to give a brief summary of the scene that's taken place in the image, especially for people who may not be able to see the image. You want to be able have them to be able to imagine it. So one thing to note, it can be pretty buggy, this feature, so you can always add alt text in Acrobat after, but like Jewell said in the beginning, if you do that and you have an edit to your InDesign file, you'll have to redo everything again in Acrobat. So it's best to be as patient as possible and just kind of get through it and do it in InDesign. All right, and let's see. Next, I'm going to hand it back to Ty for artifact tags.
Thank you, Maggie. All right, so artifact tags basically let assistive technology know whether or not an object on a page is pertinent to the content that is being taken in. So on the right, you see that there's like a stroke, a purple box, or like a texture. Those things are just visual elements. They do not tell the reader anything about what needs to be known on the page. So those are some examples of artifact tags. Next slide, please. All right, so it's pretty easy to designate those objects as artifact tags. You just go into your object export panel and then select artifact. It's pretty simple. Next slide. And if you have multiple items on a page, like purple boxes that you just want to easily create, you can do this through the object styles panel. And that can also be found from your nav bar. Just go to window, object. Yeah, you'll figure it out. But basically, you just want to make sure that when you are in that object style panel that you go to tag PDF and artifact it. That way that everything that you're doing within your document is going to translate into your accessible PDF.
And I'm going to jump in, Ty, and just add that if you do create an object style, it does save you a lot of time when you, like Ty said, when you have a lot of purple boxes that you want to create, and as tigers, we tend to have to create a lot of purple boxes. Having this set up so that the color and the basic parameters for that object, and the fact that it's an artifact preset, it speeds this up for you and gets you through. And then Ty has all of the steps from the navigation bar to object and so forth outlined on this slide.
Thank you. All right, next slide. So when to artifact as opposed to alt text. So on the right, you can see that there's an image of Mike the Tiger. This is something that you will want to alt text because as an LSU Tiger, this is important. This is just an important visual element that we use to establish our brand. So something like picture of Mike, just to let the reader know that this is important information. And something like that white line below contents, that's something that you would artifact because it's just a visual element that establishes some sort of hierarchy, but it does not let the reader know anything about the information on the page. So that's how you decide what to artifact and what to alt text. And then I'm going to pass it back to Marcus for color contrast.
All right, let's talk about some color contrast. We're going to talk about the purpose of it and patterns and textures versus white space. So on this next slide, you're going to see that the purpose of color contrast is for those who struggle with vision and color blindness. Having contrast is helpful in calling out different visual elements. So some color combinations offer more or less contrast than you may think. So to be sure, use websites and color contrast tools that help identify color combinations that are ADA compliant. So on this photo example right here to the right, I'm using a tool or a website called webaim.org, their contrast checker. And this is just an example of a color combination, blue and white, that is showing the contrast ratio and that it passes all of the accessibility standards that are out there. So on the next slide, you're going to see a color combination that doesn't quite pass all the accessibility standards that are out there. So it passes some, but it fails most. And these type of tools are really helpful to use just because you may think that a color combination has good contrast, but you always want to take a step back and think about it from your audience's perspective. So using these type of tools can really help you do that and really help you second guess and just really make sure that, okay, like maybe this isn't showing as much contrast as I might think. So just make sure you're using these type of tools to kind of give you a little bit of insight on what really is helpful for for people who struggle with color blindness. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about textures and patterns versus white space. So when you're designing your document, simplicity is the best approach. Viewers who may need cognitive or visual assistance may have a harder time understanding your document if there's a lot going on. When using textures and patterns, try being on the minimal side of things, giving the pertinent information and breathing room and legibility. So just like this slide, there's a lot of white space around the content that's very important. And it just allows us to concentrate. So some other people may need visual and cognitive assistance to be able to focus on things. And it's kind of hard to do that when the really pertinent information is on top of a really distracting pattern or photo, and it's not as legible. And you really want to make things simpler for your audience to understand. And this is really just a good tenet of good design is simplicity and white space where it makes sense to act as a platform for important information you're trying to give to your audience. So just make sure that you're not having a lot going on in your designs for the benefit of people understanding what you're trying to tell them. So I'm going to hand it off to Jewell to finish us off and talk about how to check your work.
Thanks, Marcus. So I think, thank you guys for such a great overview. I'm going to take a minute to walk you through using the accessibility checker and Adobe Acrobat. So once you've completed your PDF document, whether you've used InDesign like we recommend, or you've used some other software, you're going to open your accessibility or your PDF in Adobe Acrobat. And the way to check it for baseline accessibility is to use the accessibility check function in Adobe Acrobat. There are other tools that do a much more comprehensive accessibility check. Typically, you have to pay for that software or get a subscription to it in some way. And that's an option as well. They can do a much deeper dive into the accessibility of your document. But if you just use the accessibility check function in Acrobat, you will get baseline information in terms of whether or not you've covered the bases and have made a due diligent effort towards accessibility on your document. So to start out here, you've got the first time you use this tool, you're going to have to turn on the accessibility function in Acrobat. It's not on standard. So if you just go up to View, Tools, and Accessibility, you can add the shortcut. It's already active on this page, so it says remove. But once you do that, it's set up, and you will have that there going forward. When you have this accessibility tool active and you click on it on the right-hand side of your Acrobat document, you will have all of these functions for remediating your PDF in Acrobat. Because we are focusing on doing all of that on the front end, and we've shown you how to build the accessible principles into your document, you're going to open up the accessibility check on your document, and you just want to check your work to make sure it's accessible. Just to note, this is checked by default, this report option to create an accessibility report. It's going to save a document to your text accessibility report to your documents folder on your computer every time you run a check. We turn this off because we're more interested in the information that we're going to get once we run the check, and we can go back and make any corrections we need to make than we are with getting a report on it. So we don't find that useful to keep, and it helps not clutter up your hard drive. So once you've checked this, you want to make sure all of your accessibility principles are checked so that it can check those for you, and click Start Checking. Once it runs relatively quickly, the longer your document, it may take a little bit longer to run, but it's seconds. And if you have any errors to fix, they're going to show up over here in the left-hand column of your Acrobat document. Now, some of these things, like Marcus said earlier, are easy to fix. The tab order usually throws an error, and you just right-click and fix, and it's done. But some of these, if you have any tagging issues or alternate text issues, they can be a little more labor-intensive to fix. You can fix them in Acrobat, but it's best to go back to your native file and make the corrections there so that they are fixed. And as you're refining your document and changing photos or adding more copy or correcting copy, you save your PDF. And as long as you're working through accessibility as you're working and updating your alt text when you change a photo and making sure your hyperlinks are accurate, you're going to be good to go. This is ideally what it's going to look like when you run a check, you've done all of your work in InDesign, and all of the document passes the check. You'll notice that even if you do everything correct in InDesign, there's going to be 2 items that you have to check manually. The computer cannot tell you whether or not your document is logical. So you need to go through and make sure that that reading order that Marcus showed you is flowing accurately. and makes sense to somebody who might strip out all of the formatting that you've done and just want that information to flow in the order so that they can just focus on that text. And then also you need to make sure your color contrast is going to be acceptable and accessible. Using a tool like WebAIM, we use that color contrast checker regularly. And in fact, in our brand guide, we already have identified which of our official colors are accessible in which combinations for a campus, so that it's an easy way for them to know that. But it's a good tool to use as you work to use webaim.org. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for reviewing this presentation. As a leave behind, we've put together a document that covers some additional training that you can take to really do a deeper dive and like work through the exercises of learning how to do everything we've shown you. The trainings are in LinkedIn Learning, formerly lynda.com. And then we also have included links to some of the online tools we've referenced throughout the presentation. And we've included a checklist that will cover the things that we pay attention to in our workflow. And some of the tips, like if you're reading from the top down, then you want to check your document from the bottom up when you're doing your flow order. So we'll make that available to you. Hopefully it'll be helpful, and thanks for your time.